Welcome everyone to the Our Whole Lives Taking Flight webinar series. My name is Amy Johnson. I'm the Minister for Sexuality, Education, and Justice in the United Church of Christ. We are here today to talk about consensual non-monogamy. And before we get into that and some logistics about how today is going to work, we're going to start with some introductions. My co-host, Melanie Davis.
Hello, everybody. And that's a broad hello because there's a lot of you today. I'm Dr. Melanie Davis. I am the Our Whole Lives Program Manager for the Unitarian Universalist Association. Welcome.
We have a wonderful and diverse panel with us today, and I'm going to start off our introductions of them with Gabriela.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Gabriela. I'm a member in discernment in the United Church of Christ, nested within the Southern New England Conference, and a seminarian at Union Theological Seminary.
We also have another UUA staff person with us, Reverend Michael Crumpler.
Good afternoon, I suppose if you've crossed over into afternoon. I am the Reverend Michael Crumpler. I am the LGBTQ and Multicultural Programs Director at the Unitarian Universalist Association, and I am ordained UCC, so I'm serving both spaces.
And Vyda, will you introduce your Canadian Unitarian folks for us today?
Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. I am Vyda Ng, and I am Executive Director of the Canadian Unitarian Council. We are based in Toronto. With me here today, I have Shoshana Green, who is a member of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, and Shoshana was a member of the task force. Also, Margaret Kaur from the First Unitarian Congregation of Toronto. Margaret was a member of the task force and is a current member of the CUC Board of Trustees.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking time to be with us today. A couple logistics as we get started. This is a webinar Zoom format, so we have a Q&A feature as well as a chat feature. I see you all are using the chat feature just how we hoped you would, which is to introduce yourself, say hi, that kind of thing. If you do have questions, we ask that you go down and push that Q&A feature and put your questions in there, and we will have some time at the end to answer as many questions as we're able to do today. That said, I want to give you an overview of what we're doing here today, since this is a very broad topic. And so today our parameters are that we are going to hear about this report that the Canadian Unitarian Council had commissioned, as well as hear from Gabriela about a research paper she did for her history and polity class in the United Church of Christ that involves some research about consensual non-monogamy in the United Church of Christ. So we will hear from them. We will hear from Reverend Crumpler about welcoming congregations, and then we'll take your questions. And we are aware that you may have questions that fall way outside of that scope. And you're free to ask them, and we may or may not get to those today, but we will capture them and consider next steps. Melanie, did you want to add anything for that?
Sorry. No, I just wanted to say that thank you to Reverend Michael, because he brought the CUC report to Amy's and my attention. And we welcome ideas for future webinars. And this is likely the start of an ongoing discussion that we will be having that we might want to have a follow-up on. But please feel free to send us ideas as we move forward, because we've been at this for a year.
Great. All right, everyone, let's get started. I'm going to send it over to you, Vyda, to begin us off this morning and this afternoon, wherever you may be in the world.
I should know how to unmute myself by now. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about how we came to do this work. And this is a conversation that has been burbling for a while now. And, but if several things came together a few years ago. One of our minister came out as being polyamorous on the pulpit when he was preaching one Sunday, and that created a little bit of a reaction. At the same time, we had been getting questions and requests from our ministers and our lay-trained chaplains about how to handle requests for celebrating rites of passage for polyamorous people. And so we thought it was high time we consulted with ministers, with religious educators. And what the CUC board decided to do was to form a task force to look at the whole matter of consensual non-monogamous relationships. So Shoshana, I am going to let you take that away.
Thank you so much, Vyda. Hi, I'm Shoshana Green. I was one of the members of the Polyamory Task Force. I want to take a moment to introduce and credit the other members. We had two ministers on the task force, Reverend Beckett Coppola at Kingston Unitarian Fellowship in Ontario, and Reverend Megan Roburn at the First UU Church of Winnipeg. Reverend Beckett is here with us in the audience, but she's not a panelist, but if she wants to pop anything into the chat, that's always welcome. Unfortunately, Reverend Megan was not able to be here with us today. And there are two lay people, Margaret Kaur, who, as you heard before, is on the CUC Board of Trustees and is also a lawyer, which was a great gift to us in our work. And she's a member at First Unitarian Congregation of Toronto, and I'm a member at the Unitarian Church of Montreal. And I want to start by saying it's really important to note that none of us on the task force are polyamorous ourselves. We felt it was important to foreground that. We strove to work as allies, lifting up the voices of polyam UUs, not all of whom always feel safe speaking out in their own right. We shared our work in progress with polyam UUs, and we revised it in light of their feedback. And in particular there, I also want to note the fantastic work that's been done by the UUPA, the Unitarian Universalists for Polyamory Awareness, which is a related organization of the UUA. They generously allowed us to draw on their invaluable materials, and our work would have been much longer and more difficult if we had not been able to stand on their shoulders in places. So I really want to credit them and thank them. This is, of course, obviously a very quick overview of our report. Our full report can be found on the CUC's webpage, on the CUC's website. If anyone has that URL, which I don't right now, maybe you could pop it in the chat. There it is on the screen. Thank you so much, Vyda. And I want to start by saying that our work was grounded in the concept of covenant, in our 7 UU principles, and also here in Canada, the member congregations of the Canadian Unitarian Council also subscribe to our 5 aspirations. The 5 aspirations of the CUC are to be deeply connected, radically inclusive, actively engaged, theologically alive, and spiritually grounded. And while those are not formal aspirations of the UUA, I think that most Unitarian Universalists will resonate with them to some degree. So let me start with a quick overview. Vyda, if you could pop up slide 5, let's talk about what is polyamory. The definition we worked with is that polyamory is the philosophy and practice of loving more than one person at a time, romantically and or sexually, and doing so with honesty and integrity. The task force did not use the term consensual non-monogamy. It just wasn't the term that we were charged with, but I understand it to mean much the same thing as polyamory. I'm sure Gabriela will speak more to that. Polyamory as a concept and as a practice and as a way of living and as an identity is more and more visible in our culture these days, Canadian and American, more and more visible, more and more accepted. But it's really important to remember that polyam people and their families have always been here. They've always been in our culture, they've always been in our society, and they've always been in our UU congregations, whether or not they were public about it, whether or not anyone outside their families knew. It's important to remember that there are many ways of being polyamorous, and I'm not going to go into details here because this is, of course, an overview, but whatever form it takes, ethical polyamory is fundamentally grounded in covenant and in mutual respect among all partners. Ethical polyamory is not the same thing as cheating. It's not the same thing as promiscuity. It's not the same thing as authoritarian patriarchal polygamy. And obviously, not every polyamorous relationship lives up to the ideals of ethical polyamory any more than every monogamous relationship lives up to the ideals of ethical monogamy. But every intimate relationship has the potential to bring joy, spiritual growth, and mutual support in daily living. And those are the principles on which we worked. Vyda, if you could pop up slide 4. The task force spent more than 2 years of work, research, reading, discussion, and consultation. And part of that made it really clear, again, that polyam people are already part of our communities. They're congregants, they're church staff, and they're clergy. And I'm going to ask you to go back to slide 6 for a moment, because this is just a quotation that I think is really important. This was a comment we got from a Canadian UU as part of our work. If I was in a loving, supportive polyam relationship and my church didn't approve, I'd leave that church. The fact that my church supports my relationship and my family grows my belief in Unitarian Universalism. I think that's important for us to remember. So because our time is limited, I'm going to jump straight from our grounding precepts and the way we worked here, straight to our conclusion. And then if there's time and interest, I will backfill on how we reached that conclusion. I also want to remind you all that our complete report is available on the CUC website. But fundamentally, we, the members of the Canadian Unitarian Council's Task Force on Polyamory, believe that Canadian Unitarian Universalists and Unitarian Universalists in general, but of course we were speaking to Canadians, we believe that we are called by our principles and aspirations to welcome and affirm polyam people, polyam relationships, and polyam family structures. And this means, and Vyda, if you could go to slide 7, this means a number of things in practice. It means celebrating and supporting love and loving relationships that are based in mutual covenant. It means celebrating and supporting all children and all people rearing children, whatever their family structure. It means supporting people through grief. And it means genuinely welcoming people into our congregations with all their truths and all their loves. And that's all great, but it's not specific. We have to do more than just say we do this. We have to put our words into practice. So Vyda, if you could go to slide 10, we have some concrete suggestions on what this means in practice. We need to acknowledge diversity of relationships, forms, and family structures. Nope, back to 10, there you go. Acknowledge diversity of relationship forms and family structures in all aspects of congregational life as a matter of course, just the same way we work to be sure that we acknowledge multiple racial identities, multiple genders, multiple ages, multiple class and economic positions. We also have to acknowledge multiple ways of being in partnership. In particular, we need to do this in worship services. The primary worship services are usually the biggest event that reaches the greatest number of people on the most regular basis. It's where we affirm our values for the community at large, not just subgroups. And it's important for everyone to understand that the ministers and the worship leaders affirm polyamorous members and friends. Not just in worship services, but also in religious exploration programs and procedures. multi-generational services, children's stories, times for all ages, whatever they're called in your particular community. They need to be chosen and designed with awareness that children will come from a variety of family structures, including polyamorous ones. It means that we need to include polyamory in sensitivity and awareness training and guidance that's offered for people like staff members, for lay leaders such as board members, and for volunteers in our communities. It means that we need to acknowledge and honor, as requested and appropriate, we need to acknowledge and honor all relevant intimate connections in moments like joys and sorrows, in pastoral lists, in congregational funerals and child dedications. And I want to put a note in here for weddings. The slide that Vyda has up says non-legal ceremonies of union as feasible. Now, obviously, no more than 2 people can be legally married in either the US or Canada. But that doesn't mean that polyam people may not want to have ceremonies that acknowledge links among more than 2 people, acknowledge bonds of love shared by multiple people. For reasons that are not worth going into here, this is a very problematic concept in Canada. Please take my word for it. Read the full report if you want to know why. We do not have time. It would take the entire hour to talk about it. But for reasons, non-legal ceremonies of union are problematic in Canada. I don't believe they are in the States. We encourage USCN ministers to check if their jurisdiction presents any legal concerns around ceremonies for more than 2 people at one time, or ceremonies for people who are already legally married to someone else. But we hope that ministers in the US, UU ministers, will see their way toward fully affirming and supporting the love their congregants share, just as they would for 2 people who for some reason were unable to legally marry. Okay. Another concrete suggestion on how to put this affirmation and support into place is, if you're collecting information about your congregation, if you're collecting demographic information about family structures, people's relationships, make sure that you enable people to answer as fully as they wish to, not just name of partner. Maybe they have more than one partner they'd like to have named, that kind of thing. Having said that, though, the final point here is that it's really important to remember that the choice to be openly polyamorous belongs to the individual. Do not out someone or pressure them to come out. Make the option available. And in addition to these guidelines, we did make some specific recommendations to the CUC, which are probably not relevant here, but they may be relevant to the UUA. They're also in our report. And there is obviously so much more I could say, including details on how we interpreted each of our principles and aspirations as they relate to ethical polyamory. That's not something we have time to go through here, but again, it's all in our report. I hope that you'll take these recommendations and guidelines into deep and serious consideration and join in fully welcoming and affirming and supporting love that is based in covenant, love that is spiritually uplifting, love that grounds us and supports us and lets us fly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shoshana, for that presentation. I appreciated it so much. We're going to Gabriela next, Amy?
I believe so, unless Margaret, did you have anything you were going to add at this point?
No, I think Shoshana expressed all our thoughts and views very well, so I will be happy to hear from Gabriela.
Wonderful. Over to you, Gabriela.
Thank you so much to the organizers for organizing this. Thank you to the presenters who just went. It was so lovely to hear more in depth about the report that I read and that I definitely encourage other people to read. It's a fabulous report. So thank you for sharing your findings with us today. I'm going to share my screen because I also have a PowerPoint presentation to offer my own findings based on a research project that I did as for those who came late, my name is Gabriela de Golia and I'm a UCC seminarian. I attend Union Theological Seminary, and last spring I took a UCC history and polity class, and for my final paper I did a study on consensual non-monogamy and polyamory in the UCC context. So I was invited to share some of my findings here today, so that's what I'll be talking about. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, there we go. So I've already introduced myself, but I do want to highlight that my paper, which ended up being a 40-page document with a lot of information in it, it's available on the internet for anyone to read at the link that's posted on this slide. I'll include that link in the chat after I'm finished speaking. And you're welcome to download it, read it on your own time. It has a lot of information in it. And before I go into my research findings, I just want to share some of the goals of the research project that I did. My hope in doing the research was to explore the history, scope, and possible future of polyamory and consensual non-monogamy in the UCC. And you'll notice that I'm using polyamory / consensual non-monogamy in this slide. And for me, I wanted to make sure that I was capturing people who, the opinions and experiences of people who engage in polyamory, but who also engage in other forms of consensual non-monogamy, such as open relationships and other forms of relationship structuring. So there's a lot that can be said about what consensual non-monogamy is, and there's no fixed definition of it, like on the internet or in books. It changes widely depending on where you look. But the way that I defined it in a survey that I created for the purposes of this research project was the practice of engaging in multiple sexual relationships with the consent of all people involved. So again, consent is a huge facet of the research, and this topic is very different from non-consensual non-monogamy, such as cheating. So just wanted to clarify that for the purposes of this presentation. My second goal was to provide initial findings regarding UCC members' opinions, experiences, and hopes surrounding these topics in a UCC context. And last but not least, my hope was to help uplift the voices of UCC members who have experience with consensual non-monogamy and polyamory in order to hopefully help strengthen support systems available to them. And this is in line with my own study and practice of liberation theologies that seek to center the experiences of those most marginalized at the center of the work. The methodologies that I use included both qualitative and quantitative data gathering and analysis methods, mostly by compiling information through a self-made online survey and Zoom interviews with respondents to that survey and other people that I thought would be relevant to interview for the research project. And I just want to be very clear that my research was not affiliated with the UCC Center for Analytics, Research and Development and Data or center. So this is an independent research project for a class. And I really hope that more research of this type will be done by members of the UCC to help make a more robust, paint a more robust picture about opinions and experiences of UCC members surrounding these topics. Today's focus will be on the survey results that I compiled as part of this research project. My paper included many different sections in the paper, including a historical overview of how the denomination has engaged with these topics, a list of resources available at the time, including OWL curriculum, pointing people to OWL curriculum and more, but I don't have the time to go into everything that the 40-page paper covered, so please forgive me with that, but I hope that the focus on the survey results will at least be interesting for you today. I wanted to just highlight that the survey was crafted by me with the hopes of getting qualitative and quantitative data. It was distributed in a grassroots manner by word of mouth. So I sent it to my UCC network contacts, and then it was disseminated in a grassroots manner from there. And the exact language of the survey can be found at the end of my paper at the link that I will again provide in the chat after this presentation. So before going into the results, the demographic data I think is important to share of those who responded to my survey. I had a total of 95 respondents, which for a for a final class research project was a lot for me to sift through, which was a really beautiful process. And it's also obviously in the scope of the UCC, a very small percentage of people, but I do think that it is an interesting first look, or at least a window into larger trends, perhaps across the whole denomination. In terms of geography, conferences and associations across the continental US were represented, including the West, South, Midwest, and Northeast regions. And something that's important to note is that 85% of respondents to my survey were pastors or licensed ministers at the time. 15% were lay leaders, congregants, staffers, or other types of UCC community members. So again, this survey was distributed in a grassroots manner, and it just so happened that the communities that the link reached were heavily, were just a lot of pastors and licensed ministers were the ones who ended up responding to my survey. In addition, 50% were under the age of 35 and 55% identified as part of the LGBTQIA+ community. So within my survey results, the majority of respondents were LGBTQIA+ community members, young, and serve as pastors and licensed ministers. I didn't account for other social identity factors. And again, while I think my findings are an important and insightful window into this topic within the UCC, hopefully more research can be done to get more comprehensive data on this topic within a UCC context. So the survey results, which maybe you all are waiting for now, were the following. 25% of respondents currently practice or previously practice a form of consensual non-monogamy, such as polyamory. That's higher than the national average of 21%. 45%, so almost half of respondents have encountered polyamory and consensual non-monogamy in a UCC context. That includes a pastoral care setting, a Bible study, the ONA, open and affirming process that we have, or some other setting. And 70% said that they are comfortable with polyamory and consensual non-monogamy, either by being in a relationship structure like that themselves, or feeling comfortable with other people being in such relationships. And within that 70%, most of those respondents said that they are comfortable with and supportive of consensual non-monogamy because their theology informs this viewpoint. So the understandings that people had of God, of Christ, of Trinity, etc., very heavily informed their support and affirmation of consensually non-monogamous relationships. So all of this to say that consensual non-monogamy and polyamory is already an existing and significant reality in the UCC. I don't think that should necessarily come as a surprise, but I think for some people it can be, just because it is not something that is necessarily talked about very openly and widely in many settings. So with all of this data, I want to complement it with data on UCC members' experiences surrounding these topics. A lot of respondents said that while they are supportive of either themselves or others engaging in consensually non-monogamous relationships, many don't feel comfortable being public about this in the UCC for fear of judgment, despite the claim that all are welcome. Now, I know on the previous slide, I said that 45%, so nearly half of people have encountered polyamory in a UCC context, but sometimes, a lot of times the topic was brought up in kind of a more fleeting way, such as, studying a passage in the Bible or behind closed doors, say with a pastor in a pastoral care setting. But many people do not feel comfortable being more openly public about their opinions and their experiences surrounding this in their church settings. There was, especially given that so many people who've completed my survey were clergy, a number of them expressed fear that they could lose ministerial standing if their relationship statuses were divulged. And many members in discernment who are seeking to become ordained said that they worry that they will never be ordained if their experiences with polyamory and consensual non-monogamy are made public. This is all compounded by what a lot of people said was a lack of support from the denominational structures that they operate within regarding these topics. They said that they even though they are open to engaging with conversations surrounding consensual non-monogamy and polyamory, that they do not have enough resources to adequately navigate those conversations, and they do not feel equipped to confidently support consensually non-monogamous congregants in their church settings. So many people said that they are really yearning for additional support and guidance and resources related to this, because they recognize that it is a significant and growing need within the church community. So all of this is to say that respondents clearly stated that there is not yet enough inclusion and support surrounding these topics in the UCC at this time, despite notable spiritual care, even employment, and other types of needs. So just to zoom back out before I close, I just want to highlight some of the things that I think are important findings from my study, which is that it appears that consensual non-monogamy and polyamory is already an existing and significant reality in the UCC. A significant percentage of UCC members engage in, are supportive of, and or are interested in learning more about these topics. And this especially includes clergy, younger members, and LGBTQIA+ members. And another finding is that most of these same individuals don't feel supported enough to admit their relationship status or share their interest in these topics within UCC contexts. And many believe that more resources and support must be provided to individuals, to congregations, to the associations and conferences, and the denomination as a whole surrounding these topics, so that the needs of our church can be addressed more fully and even more lovingly. There were a number of suggestions and hopes that people actually shared in terms of how we might be able to go about this and providing more resources. I don't have time to go into the list today, but that list is in my paper and near the end in like a yellow box, so it's pretty easily findable. So again, when I share the link, you can go to the paper and see some of those implementation suggestions that respondents to the survey lifted up. So that's kind of a wrap, but I just want to once again reiterate that more research needs to be done to get a more comprehensive picture about UCC members' experiences and opinions surrounding these topics. So I hope that will happen, and it's really inspiring to see the CUC's report as a possible example of, how more research and support can be dedicated to these topics. So just wanted to say thank you so much. Again, you can read my paper at the link provided on this slide, but I'll post it in the chat as well. So thank you again so much for your time and presence.
Thanks so much, Gabriela. A question was asked in the question box about whether you had included race and ethnicity in your survey.
Yeah, sorry if that wasn't clear. I did not account for race and ethnicity as like anything that people who completed the survey could say as part of their identity. So that was not accounted for, which again points to the need for more research so that data points like that can be considered when looking into this. So thank you for the question.
I just wanted to say, just this is sort of like a point of personal privilege, how absolutely remarkable I think it is that you took this opportunity in a polity class to do this research, Gabriela, and to highlight the need, obviously, for much more research in this area. So thank you so much for sharing what your findings are and for considering all these questions. Another question was whether or not respondents identified their gender as male or female or another gender. And I don't remember if you had had that either.
They did not, and part of the reason I wanted to, I did not include a number of identity factors in my survey, in part because this topic is one that people felt, I could sense that people would feel a bit worried about divulging more information about themselves. So I tried to make the survey as like minimally, include basically the minimum amount of identifying factors when I was seeking information out from people. So I did not include gender, I didn't include race, but again, I do think that more information on those fronts would be really helpful when moving forward in this conversation. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
I mean, such a good point, right? This is so real, and you can hear from what both of those the task force and Gabriela's research showed, the fear and the concern about what people would think and what real repercussions would be if they are out. So I think that is just a super wonderful segue over to you, Michael, about how we can be welcoming congregations.
Thank you for that, Amy. Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you, Shoshana and Vyda and Margaret, so much for your work. I am the Reverend Michael Crumpler, as I mentioned earlier, the LGBTQ and Multicultural Programs Director at the UUA, and I am ordained UCC, and I live in New York City. Yeah, so a large part of my work at the UUA is our Welcoming Congregations program. Welcoming Congregations, well, we began the Welcoming Congregations program in 1990. So that's, over 30 years ago now. And we were, LGBTQ inclusive before that, but the Welcoming Congregations program was essentially to move all of our congregations together toward being intentionally welcome as it relates to all aspects of, congregational life. And so over the 30 years, we have over 900 welcoming congregations. We're only about 1,100 congregations strong. So close to 90% of our congregations are welcoming. What that means is that sometime over the last 30 years, a congregation completed a welcoming congregation application, which included changing the bylaws, using inclusive language, ensuring that you have pamphlets, reaching out to social justice organizations, and so forth. So it's a point in time affirmation of being LGBTQ welcoming inclusion, but we still see a lot of I don't say flaws, but a lot of conflicts in our congregations around welcoming LGBTQ folks, particularly interesting in that we know that on our data analysis shows that when folks visit the UUA's website, the most popular hits are to LGBTQ. So what many folks know about Unitarian Universalism is our welcome and inclusion, but what folks find when they get to most congregations is that there's a flag outside or a decal on the window, but the experience is not consistent within all of our congregations. So recently, I've been on staff here for about 4 years, and so recently, we had a renewal program, which was essentially nudging congregations after 5 years to re-up welcome. And so recently, however, I've instituted what we call the 5 practices of welcome renewal, which is an annual commitment to exercising 5 different aspects of welcome: social justice, celebrating days of observance, presenting a webinar, preaching sermons, and so forth. And so what I'm really excited about today is adding another aspect of welcome to our menu of resources. I am so grateful for this work. And a lot of what we're seeing in congregations is folks are afraid, stay away from what they're afraid of, whether it be, trans bathrooms or pronouns, trans inclusive restrooms or pronouns, or even the word queer. I got a really interesting email about the use of the word queer. Also, how do we support folks who are LGBTQ who are Black or who are Latino or who are immigrant? And so our congregations is welcoming, seeing that, oh, we have a gay pastor, or oh, we have a flag out front, and that is the extent of our welcome. But what I love about this particular conversation is that we move beyond fear, right? That what I've heard several times already is that consensual non-monogamy and polyamory are here. We are here. Just like trans folks are here, just like ace folks are here, just like intersex folks are here. We're all here together. And the main goal of a faith community is integrity and love and openness and acceptance. And it's not like we have to do anything new to learn about, we're all here, we're among one another. And so our welcoming program is a conscious effort to welcome all folks. And so in the UUA, what I'm excited about is offering these resources to congregations as another opportunity to practice welcome. One of the main questions I get when I talk to folks about welcoming congregations, oh, aren't we welcoming already? And my answer to that question is always yes, but I've been around faith for a long time. I've been a white evangelical, laugh. I was born and raised in the Black church. I'm ordained UCC. I've been a strict Calvinist, and now I'm you know, working for the UUA, and so compared to other faiths, the UCC and the UUA are welcoming. I wouldn't be here if you weren't. However, we can always be more welcoming, and we can always be intentionally welcome. Welcome is not a one-time thing. It is something that we're constantly practicing. So I just wanted to encourage you to, you know, share this webinar in your congregations, share the report in your congregations, and share Gabriela's findings in your congregations, because it is liberating to people. And it shows us how we can care for folks as they're grieving. One of the things I loved about the report is that it talked about, you know, like how, you know, what happens when we invisibilize people, or when people are invisible in congregations. You lose a partner. You know, as ministers, we need language. Children come from families with multiple partners and multiple parents. We already know that because of divorce, right? We already know that because of adoption. And so we can begin to have language to support people, which is the whole point of why we come together in faith community. So it is a pleasure for me to be here and to be part of this conversation. I will be promoting these materials in this conversation and welcoming this throughout the UUA in the US. So thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Michael. You know, one of the things that I think, a takeaway that I have from what you just said is that we already have the skills that we need to, you know, it's in our principles, it's in Christian values, you know, we have the energy around how to be welcoming and inclusive. But there's been this barrier, sort of a thought process of we can be welcoming and inclusive to these people because that program was designed for that, but what do we do with those people? And what you're saying is we have those skills. We can use those same skills and those same commitments to being welcoming and inclusive to all sorts of people. So thank you very much for that.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I want to make sure that we get to some of these questions that have been in the Q&A box. I also want to acknowledge that there's a really important side conversation going on in the chat about race. And I just want to lift that up, that I think that this is highlighting something that that Gabriela spoke to and that we are all aware of, which is that it's important for us when we're doing research to consider the erasure of race sometimes, but also balancing that with the very real fear of people being identified. And at this point, there is in predominantly white denominations, if people in a somewhat smaller marginalized community of polyamory, that could be a real concern about safety for identifiers. So the balance of that and how to move forward with that is something that I appreciate being brought up. And obviously we are aware that it's looking like more research should be done in this topic. Moving on, I want to say we have a question from my colleague, Tony Clark, who works with committees on ministry in the UCC, which are, for those of you that don't know, which are our sort of regional authorizing bodies for folks who are going through the members and discernment process. So Tony is asking if Gabriela might talk a little bit about her experience with the Committee on Ministry, and if what would you recommend that as in the national setting that we work on teaching committees on ministry in our work with them?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think one thing that a number of members in discernment worry about is whether or not they will be barred from ordination if it comes out that they are polyamorous, whether they come out to the committee or the committee learns about it in some other way. And one thing that was at least important that I know is important in many conversations that MIDs have with the Committee on Ministry is the highlight that monogamy is not a requirement in either the Marks of Ministry or the Ordained Ministers Code. It's not listed as an explicit requirement. And so I'll just share that I came out as polyamorous to my own Committee on Ministry, and it was a stressful process, in part because it wasn't clear to me how it was going to land, but thankfully I had someone who was willing to actually serve as an educator to the committee, so that I didn't have to be the one educating the committee on this topic that is obviously very complex. It's obviously there's just a lot of questions that people come up with when presented with someone who is polyamorous, and to have someone sort of who is within the UCC structures offer themselves as essentially an educational resource for my Committee on Ministry was a very helpful. It was very helpful to me and also very helpful to the committee. And so the process ended up being very smooth, and it was very affirming in the end for me. But I know that that's not the experience of a lot of people. And so when it comes to what the national setting could potentially do for committees on ministry is just to, have conversations about what is and is not considered something that can be used as judgment for someone who is seeking to, like, as a marker of readiness for ordination, what can and cannot be considered as such, and to provide, I forget the exact term, but I want to say cultural educators. Please forgive me for forgetting the exact term, but people who are willing to serve as resources for committees on ministry who have questions about this, so that the MID themselves doesn't have to be the one bearing the brunt of the educational process. So that's sort of my offering, and hopefully it helps some folks down the line.
I just want to say thank you to Reverend Elizabeth Dilley, who is here, and who is the team leader for MESA and the UCC, who says cultural consultant. So thank you very much. So I think that is really a great point, that we continue to learn, right? As Michael was saying, we continue to learn how much we know already. And Melanie, like said, how much we already know about being welcoming. And so we do know that there are places where we have things in place, and we've learned regarding other issues how to create more welcoming spaces and how to do this well. And this could apply as well for consensual non-monogamy and polyamorous folks. Yeah, not putting all the burden on the people who are going through the process already is a wonderful way to provide support. There are a few questions about whether or how it intersects. Is polyamory a sexual orientation? Is it a choice, or is it something that's not a choice? So I'm wondering maybe if somebody maybe we haven't heard from yet might be able to answer that. Margaret, can you take that one, or would that work for you?
Sure. I may not be as eloquent as some of the other panelists, but in preparing our report and doing our research and speaking with members of congregations, it was clear that sexuality, sexual orientation, sexual identification didn't actually, it was not actually the focal point of polyamory. Polyamory was relationship focused and covenantally focused. And in some cases, companionship, intimate companionship was the way people were living. So I think that to focus on sexuality or the sexual aspects may be a diversion, or it will not necessarily include all who are in polyamorous relationships.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Margaret. I appreciate that. So I'm the question box is kind of blowing up a little bit, which is great. I'm going to like highlight a few and some we've kind of talked adjacent to. So if you don't hear us specifically addressing your question, it's because I feel like we've said some things around the idea of we know how to welcome people and to think about the resources that you use in other areas. But one specific question is, are there Bible resources for polyamory? And that someone's saying, whenever I try a Google search, I only get anti-polyam arguments. So I think that's going to be you and me, Gabriela, and I'm going to.
Actually, Shoshana raised her hand.
Great. Yeah.
I just want to take a moment to again lift up Unitarian Universalists for Polyamory Awareness, who have published a pamphlet entitled Polyamory and Christianity, which was very useful to us. It's available on the web, and the URL to it is in our report because we cited it, so it's in a footnote. That is a resource that some of y'all who are Christians might find very useful, and I will now let y'all who are actually Christians speak as well.
Do you have anything specific you want to lift up, Gabriela?
I do, and it's actually a link to a website that actually has quite a bit of resources on the intersections between, these topics and Christianity. And please forgive me for not having it off the top of my head, but I have a link for a website where there's actually an online course and resource section of their website that includes resources for polyamorous Christians that I think is a good starting point for a lot of people. So Amy, do you want to take on maybe your end of the answer while I look for that, and I can put it?
Yeah, that would be great. Okay. I think really what I want to say, I don't have specific resources that are just popping top of mind, but I do want to say that I think that what's important is for us to be willing to look at our theology and how we are framing things. And I know that Gabriela had referenced the liberation theology and the idea of centering people who are in the margins. And so I think that is really important. I also am a big believer of, oh wow, lots of people are throwing things in the chat, so thank you. Also, I'm a big believer of when we're reading scripture to look at not just a verse, but a chapter of the story that is happening, and to listen for whose voices are not there and to consider what that means. So I think that those are just some, short little snippets in the time that we have to throw out there. Gabriela's looking for that and going to put that in the chat. I'm going to move on and say thank you, Gabriela. I'm going to move on and say there was a specific question from an Our Whole Lives facilitator that I wanted to address. And that was that this person said they're an OWL teacher for 8th graders and thoughts about coming out as polyamorous. I've already come out as queer. Is it helpful for them to have a role model, or is that too much disclosure? So one of the things that we really encourage in Our Whole Lives is really good boundaries, and to make sure that people are not sharing a whole lot of their personal experiences, because we want the youth to be able to discern what is okay for them and what their values are. So I think that is a really somewhere to tread really, really cautiously, because of, I'm thinking about this person felt comfortable coming out as queer, but 20 years ago, that might not have been something that they felt comfortable doing. And that might have had different ramifications than it would have today in a UCC or UUA congregation. So I think that there are things to think about in terms of why would somebody be disclosing that? What is the purpose of it? I think there are other ways to be a role model and show and incorporate polyamory discussions and answers to questions, that rather than coming out personally and sharing our personal experiences. Let's see, what else do we have? Has it always been the case that monogamy has not been a requirement for ordination in my movement, there is an ambiguous clause saying that a rabbi may not be in a relationship she or he would keep secret. Well, there's a loaded question right there. This is when we're talking about not a requirement for ordination, we're talking about what the polity of the Canadian Unitarian Council, the United Church of Christ, and the Unitarian Universalist Association have. So I can't really speak to other faiths or other denominations or other movements and what the requirements are there, because they differ. They differ from in different denominations and in different faiths. And it is an open question. I know that we do have at least one person in the United Church of Christ who was approved for ordination, who was out as polyamorous during their ordination process. And as Gabriela is speaking, you know, we're having some different ways to have things in place to support people so that it doesn't have to be secret. I think that's the tension, right? Like how to be honest, but also know that there can be very real repercussions. I see that there are some other questions. I know that we are coming to kind of the end of our webinar here, and we do have to go off right at time today because of another webinar that's happening. I'm looking to see what's really just kind of top of mind, and Andrea, can I ask you if you can make sure to capture the chat and the question and answer in the recordings, so we can bring these back up and figure out some other ways to reach out to people. I'm thinking we've talked around or adjacent to many of these. One person did ask, and I think this might be a good thing to wrap up on, is the acceptance of consensual non-monogamy different when there's not a polyamorous sexual element, like the focus is on childcare or children who are in families of polyamorous configuration? So, you know, that is an individual situation. That is an individual situation. But I will say in my experience, I really appreciated Margaret's answer about the idea for intimate connection rather than focusing on a sexual component, because I think that that is A, respectful, B, accurate, and also important when we are talking about the ramifications of this extend beyond only what is any one of us's personal sexual behavior into what is our relationship configuration, what secrets are we being required or asked to keep, what choices are we being asked to make. And as denominations, these three represented here today, who profess to be very welcoming, and in the United Church of Christ, we say often, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you're welcome here. I think that it's incumbent on all of us to think, do we really mean that? And if so, how are we really meaning that? All right, any last words from our panelists?
Just thank you.
Go ahead, Gabriela.
I just want to say thanks to everyone who came today, and to all the panelists who are here alongside me, and just, yeah, thank you for showing interest in this topic, to everyone who's here. Thank you.
Yes,
And I would
thank you so much.
be interested in further collaboration between the CUC, the UUA, and the UCC. And thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for the invitation. And I want to say thank you to all the people who helped the CUC task force in our work, the UUPA, and all the individual polyamorous people who spoke with us and reviewed our work. We're so grateful to have had the opportunity to do this.
This was a very encouraging and exciting opportunity. I really feel like my heart is bursting right now. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Keep the conversation going in your welcoming congregations and your opening and affirming churches. And And, you know, welcome to the conversation. Read the report. Read the report. It is about how, you know, polyamory, consensual non-monogamy connects with our values and upholds our values. So please read the report and please encourage others to do the same.
Thank you so much, everyone. I want to let you know that, yes, we do record these. There will be a follow-up email that will go out to each of you and everyone who is registered, regardless of whether they were here currently today watching this live or not. It will have the link to the recording, also some of the resources that we have posted in the chat. June 2nd is our next webinar. They're always the first Wednesday of the month at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern time. And we will be focusing in June on HIV and AIDS and the framework for dialogue. So we hope that you will join us for that. Thank you all so much for your time. Thank you for opening this conversation in such a meaningful way. Thank you for helping us hold the space for this. And may you go forward and have many, many more wonderful, welcoming conversations.